Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. I am truly starstruck, and it's a phenomenon that doesn't happen very often. I've met presidents, vice presidents, prime ministers, stars, leaders, brilliant people, leaders of the world, leaders of movements. But here with me today are three superheroes, not simply heroes, but superheroes, people who changed the world, transformed it, people responsible for literally saving millions of Jewish people and bringing them to Israel, and also, in no small part, bringing down the Soviet Union. Now, it's hard to imagine that, because how can people do that? Well, that's the story that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the people who did it, from the mouths of the people who did it. It's impressive beyond words. We're doing it for a lot of different reasons. First is they both came out with a book recently. Pam Cohen recently came out with her book, which is Hidden Heroes. And Ephraim Kholmyansky came out with his book, which is called The Voice of Silence. Now, these are just excuses to talk. It's just an excuse to talk. The reality is we have a need to talk because future generations need to know the story of Soviet Jewry. They need to know what happened. And in many ways, it's a part of history which we should be tremendously proud of. And that's really our introduction. Soviet Jewry itself is a remarkable concept. See, what happened is that with the rise of the Iron Curtain, 2 million plus Jews were in the Soviet Union. And the objective of the Soviet Union was to unify everyone, to make everyone the same. Now, what was interesting is that meant that Jews couldn't be Jewish. And as a result of that, they created and made it very difficult for Jews to be Jewish. For instance, here's an example. A city like Moscow, with hundreds of thousands of Jews in it, had but one synagogue. Now, how can that be? Obviously, the objective is that future generations in this world of Soviet Union would not be oriented towards Judaism. What happened is young people stood up and said, no, that's not right. It's simply not right. Not only is it not right that that be the case, but we want to embrace who we are, because after all, on the one hand, the Soviets wanted to eliminate the difference, but on the other hand, they were required to have internal passports, which said Jew on it. It identified them as Jews. And so what happened is that the young people stood up and said, let's embrace our Jewishness. And the way in which they did it was they created units of Hebrew. Hebrew became the element that bound them together, and the love of Israel, and the love of one another as a community. And they created the community against all odds. They literally brought down the Soviet Union, and they got out, not just with their own help, but with the help of partners outside of the Soviet Union. And that's where Jews from the United States especially, and from Israel, came into play. It was a very exciting series of years, but it also changed the world. So without further ado, I want to introduce Glenn Richter, who sits next to me, who was the leader of Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry. In many ways, movements are created by young people. Old people aren't involved in movements. It's actually sort of interesting. When you look at the pictures of protests around the world, even today, it's young people that care about change. And the Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry was one of those movements. Because of that, they were able to galvanize kids. A, because they thought of the future in front of them. Two, is because they had nothing to lose, because they had nothing at the moment, because they were still students. But three, and most importantly, is they were creative and cared. Because as you get older, you care about fewer things. You care about your family, you care about this. But students really got involved. And so I want to actually ask Glenn, if he could, to introduce the other two guests.
Thank you very much, Micah. Also, the answer about students is simply, we said, listen, nobody can tell us we can't do it. We can do it. So we did it. Pam is one of my great heroes. Just rewind the tape a little bit, a few decades, when one of the most visible of the Soviet Jewish prisoners, Natan Sharansky, was being interrogated by the KGB. The interrogator sneered at him and said, yeah, who really cares about you? Just students and housewives. Well, Pam represented the best of the housewife situation. I think hopefully we'll get a little more from Pam about you, from your trajectory from a, quote, simple housewife, unquote, along with other housewives, to a leader of a national grassroots movement to connect and help our brethren in the Soviet Union. Ephraim, you, on the other hand, you grew up in Moscow, and you were just a regular guy. And you somehow got connected with your Jewish identity and drew more and more into it, and from your identity into Hebrew, into making a fateful decision to organize Hebrew classes, a fateful decision to organize around the Soviet Union underground Hebrew classes. And of course, you paid the consequence. You spent time in the Gulag. So with this, let's kick off.
What I wanted to do is I wanted to ask, I'll start with you, Ephraim, if I could. The Mishnah Navot Ben Zoma speaks about Ezehu Gibor, who's a hero. And the answer it gives is Kovesh Yitzhak, who conquers his evil. You were in the presence of evil when you were there, when you saw evil, but you were able to defeat it. How were you able, as a person, arrested in Tallinn, taken by the KGB, a person who literally was on a hunger strike for 205 days? Hunger strike, 205 days. How were you able to defeat this massive giant called the KGB?
Oh, there is no short answer for that question. It's the part of the whole story. The whole story started when, as a Jewish activist, as an unofficial Hebrew teacher in Moscow, I realized that the bigger stories, the other cities, where 75% of the Jewish population is scattered across the giant country, and there is a spiritual void there, and there is some sort of a demand for Hebrew and Jewish identity, education, and there's no supply. And I thought it was a grand challenge to try to replicate what we have in Moscow, Leningrad, to other cities. And it was exactly against the will of the KGB, of the Jewish department of the KGB. So that was the starting point. Then, it was absolutely clear from the very beginning that it was very dangerous. We hoped to maneuver in such a way that we could carry out our job more efficient, with less, casualties. And it's hard to imagine. Our project started in 1980 and carried on for 7 years, and basically came out of the secrecy by our own decision. But normally, as Yulia Edelstein put it, the activity against the will of KGB could enjoy the duration of seconds. That's it. So it was the underground project, and it took many, many efforts and a blessing to create the network in my tenure in 20 cities. And when it became evident that I will be arrested, I authorized my two accomplices, assistants, or partners, to split between them my job. And I am in the hands of the KGB. And the new interrogator tells me that the so-called found the handgun, pistol, and the cartridges in my apartment in Moscow. So they are trying to set up the big, what's called show trial, to intimidate the others. And I have to make a decision what to do, what the prisoner can do, what is the only hope. If I can continue to live as a passive victim, as a tool of destroying of what was created, with that effort, with that devotion, or to react. And you know what? It was beyond me. It was stronger than me. I felt the urge to react. I cannot agree to be a passive victim. And the only way to react is to declare an open-end hunger strike. That's the way it started. And we knew that it was a formidable force against us. We are a handful of Jewish activists, along with our friends abroad, trying to achieve what is hardly imaginable to achieve, to beat the KGB, the superpower. That was the goal. Do we start because we thought there were good chances to succeed, or because it was sort of a moral obligation? The answer is clear. Sometimes in life we take a very difficult decision to pursue a certain course because it is important, not because we have a good chance to succeed. The chances were bleak.
Yeah, but not just
So
that. You had an unbelievable view of your captors. You write almost like Janusz Korczak writes in the Warsaw Ghetto, and I'm sure that you knew of him. You say of your captors, that your interrogators, maybe they really don't know what's really happening. There's a famous line in Janusz Korczak where he looks down and he sees in the ghetto Janusz Korczak, the great leader of the orphanages in the ghetto, who took orphans and protected them in the ghetto of Warsaw. And he looks and he sees maybe that new soldier there was a street sweeper in Leipzig. Maybe he doesn't know what's really happening. Maybe he just came in yesterday. That's how you describe some of your captors, people who were torturing you. You had a positive feeling about humanity in the most ugly parts of the world.
It was the fight. It was the struggle. It was the high professional KGB, high caliber professional KGB people who were interrogating me and trying to intimidate the entire Jewish community, Jewish activists, and for sure our city's project. And we had to fight back. Their identity was of less interest to me. It was sort of formal force. I wanted to do my best. I felt that that's the moment. You have to win the moment, to win the hour of the hunger strike, because their reaction was to throw me into the punishment cell. So I kept the hunger strike inside the punishment cell.
Just to describe the punishment cell.
The punishment cell is a notorious place. A small room, 2.5 meters by 2 meters, small toilet in the corner, and what we call the bed. It was not bed in our prisoners' language. It's called cot. It's sort of a metal frame with the bare plank inside, no bedding. But the peculiar part of it is that it's locked onto the wall during the day. So the prisoner in the punishment cell can use it from 11 o'clock in the evening till 5 in the morning. 5 in the morning, the guard comes and takes you out and locks it to the wall. There is a cold floor. You cannot lie down on the floor, and there is nothing to sit. When people ask me to describe the feeling, I always tell them, first, try to imagine yourself the luxury of your home without the KGB, without any threat. You are just not allowed to sit down on anything from the early morning to late at night. Today, tomorrow, in a week time, in a 1 month's time, like that. So it is a struggle. And I understand that the conditions in the punishment cell are so harsh that they expect me to surrender, to break down in the course of the first days. Those first days are critical.
So you're unbelievable. Pam, what motivated you? How did you, what lit your flame to this movement when no one really knew about it in America? And established Jewish organizations were passive at best to these issues. What ignited you to this cause?
Micah, what you said about with your introduction of Ephraim, you said, Ephraim, you were just a regular guy. And I think that is one of the things that I have learned most about this whole process. Both of the people who I met, like incredible moral giants like Ephraim, who was really a hero of the Jewish people, and the people that I met throughout the Soviet Union, and even people who were working like Glenn on the outside, we were all regular guys. You know, there was nothing really predictable about any of us on our personal trajectories. We were all living our lives until we had some kind of a point of free will where we decided we had to do something. And for me, it was, and most of my colleagues, I speak about all the people in the Union of Councils on whose shoulders I stood, who came before me. We were all very much influenced by the Holocaust and by what we perceived as the complicit silence of our parents' generation. And when the news of the Leningrad trials became public, and I think, you know, your listeners have to know that before 1970, what Americans knew about Jews in the Soviet Union was negligible. If you could picture like North Korea today, that's, I think, how most Americans saw Russia then, with a vast anonymous people and Jewish citizens. And then suddenly a group of Jews burst into the media and into this public sphere by attempting to take a plane from the Soviet Union to Sweden. Now, for those of us who saw this on the news, we, you know, immediately understood that Jews are not terrorists or criminals. And we began to seek information about what prompted this. And I think that is what triggered our reaction when I saw and learned, and I'm speaking, I know, for Glenn and for the rest of the activists in the grassroots movement in the West, when we understood that Jews were denied permission to leave, that they were cut off from their people, they were cut off from communications with their people, they were cut off from Israel, and in a way from isolated from their destiny, their history. Something in me, and I think all of my colleagues, screamed, "Not on my watch." And even though I was a young mother who had been an English teacher, I had 3 little kids, something yelled, no, this is not good. I cannot sit by and watch this happen. And we just reacted. And I started trying to get information. At that time, I didn't even know that there was any grassroots organization. I didn't know. I was very young. I had 3 little kids, and I found a Philadelphia newspaper that carried a weekly column on Soviet Jews, which, of course, from Chicago, I subscribed to. And little by little, I learned what was happening in the Soviet Union. And they advised us to write letters and to protest the Soviet Union. And little by little, I connected with the grassroots organization, with Chicago Action, with Soviet Jewry, and with Student Struggle, and with 43 grassroots organizations throughout the United States. And we, all independent organizations, began to try to document information from the cases and information about people who had been refused in the Soviet Union, and monitoring as much as we could these underground Hebrew cells and activists, and to provide relief and advocacy for them as individuals. I mean, for us in the West, for us in the Union and student struggle, Glenn can attest to this, this was not just an anonymous body of Refuseniks or Hebrew teachers. Yeah. These people were individuals with wives. We knew the names of their wives. We knew their children's names. We knew their birthdays. We knew their addresses. We knew what they were doing. We knew what days they were, where they were conducting their seminars. We knew what they were teaching, what they needed to teach. They used to say, and I once had a correspondent reach me from Helsinki when he left the Soviet Union, and he said, I have a feeling that when a Refusenik in Dnepropetrovsk sneezes, you say, God bless you. And I think that's how it was. We knew more about what was going on in the Soviet Union than we really did in our own cities.
So I want to loop Glenn in on this if I could. Yes, Glenn.
So Pam, I remember the first time you traveled to the Soviet Union with your husband, Lenny, was, if I remember correctly, 1978. And it was one thing to communicate, one thing to even try to get those phone calls into the Soviet Union, one thing to get letters and documents that were smuggled out, both by tourists and by, let's say, friendly diplomats or friendly journalists. But now you're in the Soviet Union, and you're meeting these Soviet Jews, especially the Refuseniks, those who were denied emigration. How did the meeting stack up with the view from afar?
I met people who, in the flesh, who I felt that I already knew. I was only seeing their physical bodies, and I felt like I was seeing old friends. Actually, when I sat in the rooms in Leningrad and Odessa and places that now are, in the papers every day, Odessa and Kiev and Kharkov, I sat with people who I either felt I knew of a lifetime. Some people who were older looked like my uncles and my aunts. I felt like I was with my brothers. I felt that I was with my people. I felt at one with them. I felt a commonality with them that I don't think I have felt probably since. In many respects, the people in the Soviet Union, the Jews in the Soviet Union, were modeling for us, especially for me. I can speak for myself. I met Jews who had been forcibly assimilated. I mean, they had been victims of forcible assimilation for decades. And they were also victims of state-sponsored anti-Semitism. And yet, people like Ephraim Kholmyansky and people like Yulia Khasharovsky and the people like Ari Volvovsky were responding with a sense of moral courage and Jewish pride. They were connecting to their people, to their history, to their destiny. And I can tell you that they dragged me along with them. Mm-hmm. They pulled me into it. And as they grew and as they asserted their moral courage, they certainly affected me and in my life. And I mean, Sharansky has once quipped, and he was that doesn't know how right he was. The Refuseniks did more for us than we ever could have done for them.
I want to bring Ephraim in on this because he's on the inside going out, and I want to hear from him specifically about this issue. You modeled, not just for Pam and for Glenn, but for all of us, totally unaware, obviously, that you were doing this. You're unaware of your heroism, your tremendous giant stature, and you were doing it for a reason. Something inside of you motivated you, pushed you to grab onto this? Or maybe it was them, maybe they pushed you. What was it that pushed you? And specifically the focus, if you could, why Hebrew of all things? Why Hebrew? And I ask that because it's a theme. Hebrew becomes a theme throughout the entire movement of Refuseniks. As a word, I just want to express it. We're using the word Refuseniks, but I want the viewers to understand Refuseniks is a category. What it means is that they became Refusenik by requesting permission to leave the Soviet Union to go to Israel. As soon as that request was made, they were refused. Being called a Refusenik changed your entire status. As soon as you submitted for that request, your status was changed, and then you moved to this idea of Refusenik. Your idea was to come, you wanted to leave. You were not permitted, by the way, to ask permission to leave to go to the United States. You were permitted to actually ask permission to go to Israel. You were refused that permission, but that was an interesting dilemma within the Soviet Union. But I wanted to focus on Hebrew if you could. But what exactly pushed you and motivated you?
Again, it's taken out of context, a little bit difficult. Almost all we know about the Jewish national renaissance in the USSR is a direct outcome of the Israeli victory in the Six-Day War. There were very few exceptions. I was one of these exceptions. I wanted to make Aliyah even before. As a high school, I discussed this subject with my mates. It was so funny when I told them that I want to make Aliyah. It looked ridiculous. But I told myself, if the miracle happens and the Iron Curtain, the heavy gates of the USSR would open for the short moment of time, I want to make use of this moment. And by that time, to get prepared, to learn English, to acquire a profession. And it took me a decade. And as a computer engineer, every day I go home after my office, somewhat desperate that my dream didn't advance. Not only didn't come true, simply not a single inch brought us closer to them. And I just listened to the English language broadcasts because they were not jammed. In Israel, Voice of Israel telling us an interesting story. There's already the Jewish activities in Moscow, and there are Hebrew circles. And I felt the feeling, well, I could not explain it. Maybe birds of a feather flock together. So I wanted to find the way to these circles that are closer to my world. I envied them. I wanted to find them. And I started to learn Hebrew. It was sort of a magic because English was difficult. And here, sometimes the new words, I felt it was something familiar to me. In previous generations, maybe I heard them just to renovate, or to renew, refresh. And that's already a movement. You know, that's in most interviews, people, journalists, pick up several famous names. It's understandable, but it's only part of the story. The second part of the story was already movement. I joined the movement, and Hebrew was the most important part of this movement. It was the biggest one, and that opens us the horizon. First, it brings us together because it's our common language. It brings us out to our past, to the Jewish civilization, whoever wants. It brings us closer to Israel. And during my underground project, I thought a lot how to merge individual people into a small community. And I thought one of the things we need, besides common struggle and common goals, is common activity that is full of meaning. And the Hebrew was the platform. Other things were built on top of this platform. But that was our main engine. It was enjoyable. You can feel the past. You feel to be the part of the many generations. We never thought of being, I don't know, to copy something. We discovered a new realm was intoxicating.
It's also pretty dangerous.
There's no question. The interesting thing is that you were able to focus on something that earlier generations actually in Russia focused on also. Odessa was the centerpiece of the Renaissance of Hebrew. Bialik was in Odessa. The great writers of Hebrew, just before your period, came out of Odessa. They did the same thing you did, but it wasn't illegal then. But it was really within your own world that the poet laureates, the greatest writers of Hebrew, came out of the same environment that you came out of, which was also extremely romantic. I said the other night in the lecture, rabbis learn in Aramaic. The Talmud is in Aramaic, but there's no love poetry in Aramaic. Love poetry is in Hebrew. We write Hebrew poetry because of our connectedness to ourselves and to our past. And you were able to focus on that. Whether it be, not just you, your movement did, whether it be accidental or not. It was more important than Shabbat in many ways. It was more important than teaching about kashrut. It was more important than teaching about holidays. Because from Hebrew, you were able to expand to those other things. Not from the holidays to Hebrew. And you were able to get this power and foundation, which was able to expand beyond anything else in words. Because after all, we know the world was created with a word. Hashem literally created the world with a word. And that's what you were doing. And they couldn't take that away from you. The Soviets and the KGB couldn't take that Hebrew away from you. And that's inspirational.
You know, when you confront such a formidable foe, you need to convey the simple message that you are going to go far enough, because they understand only very, very strong words, whether it's in words or in action. They need to understand that you are going to the very end. You're determined to go to the very end, and no compromise somewhere in the principal matters. Their understanding of Jewish behavior was lacking. They didn't appreciate it. They didn't understand. They wanted to make a mess out of the movement, and they failed. It's incredible. You know, we deserve to be the part of the grand historic miracle. Just everyone did his small job, part of a grand mosaic. And, you know, Pam told about our inspiration, but let me tell you, the guys, that we always knew there are friends that take our struggle close to heart, make it their own struggle, and they would do their utmost. The most direst situations between these thick walls of the prison, we knew they fight, they struggle.
It's unbelievable. Pam, in many ways, you reached literally the highest levels of government to help and assist. We're not just talking about Scoop Jackson. When President Reagan, and it's fascinating to read both of your books together, because you sort of see, Ephraim is aware that Reagan is going to be meeting with Gorbachev. We have all these interesting connections. And when President Reagan stands up and says, let those people go, he's echoing Moshe Rabbeinu, he's echoing Moses. And then Bush repeats it. as the vice president. Let those people go. Let them go. He's saying to Gorbachev, it's unbelievable what you did. You took it from a grassroots movement and made it into a international movement. Now, obviously, there was an Israeli connection also behind the scenes and everything else that's going on there too, and we're well aware of that. I don't know how much we're allowed to talk about it today, actually, which is a different story. But Israel was also very involved. But the masses of the Jewish community were behind you, but the leadership wasn't, Pam. How did you connect to that? The establishment was reticent to ruffle feathers to save a massive component of Jewry, the Jews of the Soviet Union. I remember I mentioned it to you the other day, Glenn. We had buttons. There were buttons. Soviet Jewry buttons were all over. I had a whole jacket filled with buttons. But the best one was Russia was not healthy for Jews and other living beings. The things.
Which was, by the way, we ripped it off from the anti-war movement.
Right. I saw that because I accidentally was doing some research into that issue, and I saw that the anti-war movement had the same thing, and you guys said that was a spectacular message. You were able to touch people here, even the powerful leadership of the United States, more so than even the powerful leadership of the Jewish community.
So you want to know how we did that?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? It was a very preconceived methodology. It was what we did across the board, and I'm speaking not only about Chicago Action, I'm speaking about all the other councils. We developed a personal relationship with the organizations and with synagogues. And because we couldn't run all these advocacy movements out of our office, if at some point we had 20 or 25 boys and men in prison camps and hundreds of Refuseniks, none of us could really sustain advocacy for each individual case. So what we did was we assigned different groups and synagogues one case, one Refusenik case, one prisoner case. And their job was basically, we provided them with all the information that they needed on that family, on that Refusenik family, on that prisoner's family. And we really assigned and would update them with any information that came into our office that was, relevant to the case. And then we basically gave them instructions how to run that case. They became case managers. And what they needed to do was, in order to enlist political advocacy, they had to take those cases to their congressman. And many of them assigned their congressmen these cases and their senators. And so we worked the Congress with the help of, 40, 50, or 30 synagogues in the state of Illinois. Well, you multiply that across the country. Before you knew it, I think it was maybe maybe something like 1979, I think it was. I'm not sure of the date. My congressman and another congressman started the Human Rights Caucus in the House of Representatives, which was basically a Soviet Jewry arm that we were running in the House of Representatives. And congressmen were making statements about Kholmyansky and about other Refuseniks and prisoners from the floor of the House. So we were using the grassroots to influence the Congress and the Senate. And then in addition, we were reaching out to the State Department through the Congress and directly. And gradually we were briefing, National Security Council advisors and secretaries of state and met with presidents. I met with two presidents and with Condi Rice and with George Shultz. And we could only do that because we had the muscle of the grassroots behind us. And because, you can ask Glenn, we were absolutely exacting about our information. We had to be extremely careful because we really needed we had the credibility to provide the State Department with those lists that they would take on summits, that the president would take on summits.
No, it's unbelievable because the power, and it's sort of interesting. What you did was brilliant because you brought it down to individual names and people. I remember I was much younger. I remember I first had Ida Noodle as a bracelet, but it broke, and I was crushed. And I got Yosef Begun as a bracelet, and I had their names, and people, everyone I walked, everywhere I went, asked about them. We were able to tell them about it, the story. And it's interesting because Ephraim, also in your biography, you speak about it for the moment in your trial. You said, it's not about me. It's not about the Refuseniks in general. It always has to be a name. You have to give a name to the cause. Everyone, if it's not a name, it's faceless. And it's true. They all had faces. The names of these people, the Refuseniks themselves, had faces and causes. And as a result, it wasn't just this ethereal concept of ether in the air. It was a real, seriously, we're saving people's lives. Individual people's.
Can I just interject something?
Of course.
I want to tell you that at people's seders throughout the country, they put a chair, and that chair represented their family in the Soviet Union.
Yes.
People, you're absolutely right. People felt attached. I remember that I used to be able to say that if I could buy Yevgeny Lane out, for example, if I literally could buy him out, I know that exactly who to go to, who would have put a second mortgage on their home.
Yeah.
They would have gone into debt to be able to release people for prison. That's how personal it was.
And that was the reason for the success. The success was that you were able to puncture this balloon of a cause and make it into something that literally people could touch, see, relate to, with pictures. How you got the information, how the Jerusalem Post, by the way, is unbelievable. In Ephraim's book, he actually brings the posts from the Jerusalem. I'm a columnist in the Jerusalem Post, so I'm stunned by it. It's personal. Literally, the updates of what's going on in this hunger strike. Someone is getting that information out to Judy Siegel. Someone's bringing that out. And once it's in the Jerusalem Post, it's all over the place. And that was, I don't know how you did it, but people learned about it and they knew about it and the real things. And as a result, it was transformative.
Can I just tell you about that? Because I'd like to tell you something that the man is no longer alive. But there was a time that the Jerusalem Post was not reporting about what was going on in the Soviet Union. And we were at a national union meeting in Jerusalem, and I met a writer for the Post by the name of Louis Rappaport.
Oh, sure.
May he rest in peace. And we brought him to Chicago. We briefed him extensively and sent him from Chicago to Moscow. And he came back and wrote, I think it was a 3-page article about Refuseniks. I think it might have been in the early 80s. I'm not exactly sure by dates. And after that, Enid Wertman in Jerusalem wrote a regular update article in the Jerusalem Post. But I mean, that's how we worked. If we needed to get publicity, if we wanted to educate, we grabbed on to journalists, we grabbed on to rabbis, we grabbed on to doctors, whoever we needed, we sent them to Russia, and they came back changed and empowered and on fire.
Pam, could I just talk about our colleague, the incredible, extraordinary, unfortunately late Michael Sherbourne in London? How did he get involved and what did he do? And how did he transform things?
Michael, Glenn, you could talk about that.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Michael Sherbourne was actually was a founder of Kibbutz Kfar Blum in Israel because his wife was ill, went back to London. On a dare, he learned Russian. And he decided that he would, as part of the Soviet Jewry movement, he would start making phone calls to Refuseniks. And over the course of several years, he made 8,000 phone calls. 8,000 phone calls. And remember, it's not just a phone call. You had to tape the call. Remember, this was not the time of the internet. You taped the call. Then you took the little reel-to-reel tape and you transcribed it from the Russian into Russian. Then you translated everything into English. Then you transformed that into useful information. Then you called somebody in the United States, myself, people from your office, other places, and we then taped it, transcribed it, and sent it out as news releases or used it to speak to members of Congress.
Unbelievable.
But this is an extraordinary effort by an extraordinary man. One person out of one person.
I want to flip back, if I could, to Ephraim. I read about you, and we'd never met until this very moment. But your heroism in your trial was remarkable. You immediately latched on to the fact that this was going to be a show trial, as you mentioned in your first comments, and you weren't going to let it happen. And the reason why you weren't going to let it happen, I think, is because you were going to focus on the truth, on the framing of your guilt, that they framed you the whole time, and you were not going to bend. And it's sort of interesting, and I don't know, I would have loved to have been in the courtroom and watched. It almost seemed as if the judge knew you were framed, and as a result, he had to convict you, but not of all the crimes, just of almost a tiny crime, relatively speaking, to the crime of having a weapon, but the crime of actually having, as you referred to them as cartridges, the bullets, but not even. And you went through in your own defense explaining how it's totally impossible that this could be your gun, and that there's not even a record of the gun actually even ever existing. How could it be yours? It was. I was laughing and crying at the very same moment. But the fortitude that you had to stand up in the face of the KGB and literally win, for all intents and purposes, you won your case that you were being framed at. That's unbelievable.
It was very difficult to get prepared to the proceedings because at that time I was kept in the cold punishment cell together with another inmate, and my fingers were frozen. It was difficult physically to write, to make the notes. And I thought, how could the person bear his own court proceedings?
Yeah.
You are just sitting there, very difficult to sit because it's the bench is wood, made of wood, and there is no flesh in my body after the 4.5 months of hunger strike, even the force feeding. And you will hear the verdict. How will you bear it? You will be behind the bars for many, many years. They promised me 7 or 5 years in imprisonment with 5 to 7 years of so-called exile. And all those efforts, was it in vain? Or would it bring any result? It's interesting that the logic can have a role there in this theater of absurdity. It's still interesting that they listened, that they try to make it reasonable, plausible. And before my so-called last speech, it was a short prayer, because there is always a problem to have the guts to tell the harsh words about the KGB, framing up the whole story and what's behind that, what they want to achieve. They want to catch not only me, they want to destroy the entire movement, the entire city's project. They want to intimidate the others. I just wanted to show my
Prisoner bracelet.
Yeah, prisoner bracelet. That's unbelievable. I appreciated that. Thank you so much. I want to move, if I could, for a second, and I want to talk about Judaism in general, and the Jewish community in general, and Orthodoxy, and becoming frum, becoming religious. But before that, I want to, if I could, and I want to, after you were convicted, and Glenn and I spoke about this last night, after you were convicted, you were sent out to the Gulag, and you walk into your barracks, and you weigh 80 pounds. I mean, 80 pounds after 205 days of, it's unbelievable. You walk in, you throw open the door, and you announce to the people people have to realize the Gulag is not for political prisoners who are refuseniks. It's for hardened criminals who are out there, and real serious hooligans. And you walk in, and you say, I am an Orthodox Jew. I need to pray right now. Which direction is Jerusalem? And these criminals look at you like you've come down from space. I mean, I was laughing like you're laughing now, but the reality is, but you grabbed them as you grabbed everyone. You were able to touch them. They could connect to you differently. You weren't one of them, but you were at the same time. You were their, in many ways, almost their leader. In many ways, you helped them, as they called you professor and everything else, as you helped them. You were inspirational to them, if you can imagine that. It's just mind-boggling. I want to move, if I could, though, to the question of how you became religious. We would say, both of you. Pam, we'll start with you. In other words, this movement had an impact, but you're now changed. And one of those changes is your observance of Jewish law.
And Alia.
Yeah, I was, my husband and I grew up in identified but not observant families. And our families typically came from Eastern Europe and from Russia. And I was second generation. And by the time it came down to me, we had whatever my grandparents had was lost. And my first Friday night Shabbos dinner was in Moscow.
Wow.
And I was deeply moved. I in the book, I remember I had a vision. I really had a vision as Mila Vovosky was lighting candles. I think that was in 1978. I saw what it must look like in heaven when women light candles first in Jerusalem, and then maybe it's the next city is Greece and Italy and Moscow and Kiev. And as the world turns, how the lights of Shabbos turn on. And I little by little, as Refuseniks asked me for books, I remember someone asked, of course, while people were in refusal, they had no information on Judaism inside the Soviet Union. So everything was really brought in as if it was a big holding camp for Refuseniks. And really all the tapes and all the books and all the everything, material assistance had to be brought in from the West. But anytime anyone asked me for a book, whether it was Kitov's Books of Our Heritage, I bought one for them, I bought one for me. Whatever they wanted, I brought one for me. And as they learned, I learned. And when one of the Refuseniks decided that they were going to keep kosher in Russia and asked for a book of kashrut, there was no question. If they were going to do it in Russia, we were going to keep kosher in Chicago.
Unbelievable.
And one thing I have to tell you, Michael, one thing I've learned about this movement, one thing I've seen about this movement is that one thing that has impacted me, and I see it from my colleagues who have bought apartments in Israel and who have made Aliyah and who are big supporters of Israel and who became observant. And I see the power of the ability to be able to change. I think that what I saw in the Soviet Union among Jews was Jews who were changing, who had given up their Soviet identity and who had become pariahs, social, economic, political pariahs based on what truth. Ephraim talked about what was true, based on truth. And I saw in America a veil of materialism that kind of covered what was true. Mm-hmm. And the pursuit of truth and identity together changed me. And as Jews in the Soviet Union were changing, we were changing. And it was, life is a journey. And if you don't use it to grow and to change and to perceive what is the truth, it's a waste. And I learned that from the Refuseniks.
Thank you. Ephraim, do you want to try to answer that in the few minutes we have left?
I will. Not a simple question. It started even in high school when with my schoolmates, discussed the eternal questions. The question was about the Jewish destiny. How we are hated for millennia. What's the reason? Second question. How we survived despite that. That means that there is some reason for that, some mission for us. That means that there is some divine, let's call it a divine force that protects us. It doesn't mean that I was observant in the normal sense of the world, but I felt that there is something above us that looks at us, that deals with us, that is involved one way or another. And that was the part of my path, spiritual path. The second part of the story was I, from the very beginning, felt that there's a message of many generations that passed from one another. And this message I would want to pass intact to the other generation. I want not to be the one who lost it.
Good.
Not the broken part of the mechanism. That continued later, and when I was one of the most, active Hebrew teachers, my students started to get deeper in the meaning of being Jewish. And there was already some Jewish history and then religion groups, and they came with the questions. They thought that if I'm a teacher, I can answer these questions as well. And I failed.
I'm sure you did well.
And I felt it very acute feeling of a failure. I wanted to learn myself. I opened the book, understood nothing. So I wanted to learn and never left.
Mm-hmm. No, it's very exciting. I want to thank you, all three of you, for giving us a tiny précis, just a sliver of opening in terms of the greatness of the mission that you accomplished. You changed the world. Very few people can actually say that, but you changed the world. You made it a better place because of the things that you did. And I, sitting in front of you, truly am humbled in so many different ways. And I hope that other generations will be able to learn from this, just how remarkable people can put their shoulders together and accomplish great deeds. So I want to thank you so very much for the time that you spent with us. And hopefully we'll be able to see one another, meet one another face to face in the future. Thank you all. You just witnessed an unbelievable conversation with heroes, people who transformed the world. Not in a small way. They changed the world in general and the Jewish world in particular. And I hope that we and our children and our grandchildren can use these models to also change the world. What a few people can do when they put their shoulder to the wheel is truly inspirational. Thank you very much.